We Canadians happen to live, for the most part, within about 100 kilometers of one of the most magnificent experiments in the history of nation building ever, the United States of America. Yes, just like us, it has its moments, but overall, it's dwarfed the world in demonstrating a can-do attitude and challenging the odds. In a moment, and in honor of the United States and its 246-year history, I'll spend a few moments on the subject of Abraham Lincoln, who came from a dirt-poor background to become president and end slavery, right here on Shurman Unlimited.
You wanted real talk, and this is where you'll hear it. Uninhibited by the toxic influences of cancel culture, unvarnished and unfettered, unencumbered by the censorship of traditional radio, uncontaminated by big media interests.
And now, Shurman Unlimited.
Abraham Lincoln became the United States' 16th president in 1861, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation that declared forever free those slaves within the Confederacy in 1863. Lincoln warned the South in his inaugural address, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it." Lincoln thought secession illegal and was willing to use force to defend federal law and the Union. When Confederate batteries fired on Fort Sumter and forced its surrender, he called on the states for 75,000 volunteers. 4 more slave states joined the Confederacy, but 4 remained within the Union. The Civil War had begun. This son of a Kentucky frontiersman, Lincoln, had to struggle for a living and for learning. 5 months before receiving his party's nomination for president, he sketched his life. "I was born February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky. My parents were both born in Virginia, of undistinguished families. Second families, perhaps I should say. My mother, who died in my 10th year, was of a family of the name of Hanks. My father removed from Kentucky to Indiana in my 8th year. It was a wild region with many bears and other wild animals still in the woods. There I grew up. Of course, when I came of age, I did not know much. Still, somehow, I could read, write, and cipher, but that was all." Lincoln made extraordinary efforts to attain knowledge while working on a farm, splitting rails for fences, and keeping store at New Salem, Illinois. He was a captain in the Black Hawk War, spent 8 years in the Illinois legislature, rode the circuit of courts for many years. His law partner said of him, his ambition was a little engine that knew no rest. Abraham Lincoln, quintessential American, and this was only about 160 years ago. He was an amazing man and an amazing president. May the light shine brightly on our southern neighbor, now just 4 years away from age 250. From your Canadian friends on July 4th, God bless America. Why don't we say a few words on climate change? Singh and Trudeau seem to agree on climate change and the fact that it is very clear and present danger to Canada and to the rest of the world, too. I don't. Also, I think the cost that we are incurring to address climate change is patently bullshit. Sure, there's climate change. There's always been climate change. There will always be climate change. Climates do one thing. They change. But how humanly vain we are, don't you think, to believe that we, the human race, are capable of subverting nature. We're not. We can fix what we expel into the atmosphere. I'll grant you that, and I think we should. Cow farts, we can limit that by not farming so much in the way of livestock. And hydrocarbon emissions that come from automobiles and other vehicles, ships, trucks, whatever it happens to be, those may not be the biggest issue, but they are an issue. But we can't do a hell of a lot else. Now, if you take a look at some of the material on what science has found, scientists, they look at ice core samples that come these days from where you can get ice core samples, which would be the Antarctic. And they're kind of like the rings in trees. If you take a look at an ice core sample and you examine it properly, it shows clearly on a year by year by year basis that the world has always experienced cycles of heat and cold, heat and cold. But Trudeau and the Paris Accord gang and people from Glasgow, the geniuses with the private jets, they're going to fix it all, and they're going to do it with our money. No, moneybags, you're not. What bugs me is that these people demonstrate an amazing naivety, or maybe a stupidity. We have an economic problem. We have a gigantic economic problem. And if you think it's bad paying $2 or thereabouts for gas, and you think it's bad when you pay $20 for ground beef, that's bad, but it's not as bad as it's going to get. So the rest of the world has this as well. This is not unique to Canada. We have the oil, but we don't build refineries, and that's the biggest problem. And we don't get a chance to build pipelines. We have situations where the people in British Columbia, through their government, say, you're not building a pipeline out to the coast here. We don't want to pollute the Georgia Straits. And the people in Quebec say, not across our territory. They don't mind bringing in Arabic oil from Saudi Arabia, that's okay, but they won't let us put a pipeline across their land. And notwithstanding the amount of transfer payments still received by Quebec, we cannot build a pipeline across their land, which would take it to water and give us the capability to transport our oil to the places in the world that need it. One of which is Europe, where you've got various countries, and we'll get into that in a moment, who are still buying from Russia, despite the fact that we have agreed through organizations to which they and we belong that we will impose sanctions that include not buying Russian oil. So there you go. We need transport here in Canada to a clearly defined, hungry for oil world market. And we have to stop thinking that climate change is going to do us or our children in imminently. I looked last week at a photo of the Statue of Liberty taken in the past month or so. And it shows the statue on its pedestal sitting out there on Liberty Island in New York Harbor. That particular body of water is actually the beginnings of the Atlantic Ocean. So if the oceans were rising, much less rising precipitously, we'd see it. But there's a photo next to it taken approximately 50 or 75 years ago, and the level of the water against the pedestal of the statue is approximately the same. In fact, if I were a guessing man, I'd say it's an inch or two lower today than it was then. So prove to me that we're precipitously up against climate change that's going to ruin us and bury our cities, or more correctly, drown them in water. Not going to happen. Not imminently. All right, I mentioned Russian aggression and the fact that we've imposed sanctions against Russia because of what it's doing in the Ukraine. Meanwhile, as mentioned as well, our own partners are buying Russian oil like crazy. In Europe, that would include Germany and Poland and the Netherlands, who attended the NATO conference last week, and they remain Russian customers, as do China, although that's not unexpected, and they're not a member of any alliance with us, and India, where we saw photos of good buddies Justin Trudeau and Narendra Modi of India, and they're talking and palling around, but we're not on the same page with regard to the aggression in the world today that in some very real way threatens all of us. My view, there are sanctions, and our allies have to get behind them, or hey, why do we waste the money? Why do we support Ukraine? Why do we keep the fighting going on? Just tell Putin Russia will be funded forever, selling its oil, and open up the gates to the Ukraine and forget it. What a joke, and we'd laugh, but it's not a funny one. I know it presents hardships, but as we suffer them too on an economic basis, shouldn't we expect our partners on the European side to take one for the team as well? We don't buy from the Russians. We don't need to. We have oil ourselves. If only we could get it out of Canada and make it available to the people who are buying from Russia, we could cut that off and we could make some money for ourselves, which is badly needed and which is vested underground, where we have about 300 years of supply for the world. Let's think about that. Okay, one more thing. We just plain have bad leadership, and the bullshit mainstream media wants us to discuss amongst ourselves whether, for example, Pierre Poilievre has a shot at knocking Justin Trudeau out if he becomes the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, or if there's enough support for Jean Charest if he accedes to the same point. How do you know that none of these guys actually isn't electable? How do you know what's electable if you don't know what's down the road? Let Trudeau keep on doing what he's doing. Let the Conservatives fight their fight, and let's wait till September and see who winds up leader of that party. And let's watch what Trudeau does in the meantime and subsequent to that. Let's also watch the support of Jagmeet Singh. And we may wind up thinking that the devil himself might make a better prime minister than what we've got now, aided and abetted by a guy who's just a big pile of noise. What does the media want? Well, I would say roughly Nero fiddling while Rome burns, because we sure are Rome, and I smell smoke. I'm Peter Shurman.
Shurman Unlimited.
Let Peter know what's on your mind. Drop him an email. info@petershurman.com.
Find future episodes wherever you find your favorite podcasts. So if you like what you've heard, tell a friend. If you really liked it, tell 3 friends. If you really hated it, tell 3 enemies. We'll talk again soon.